Present you is burnt out at your current job, but future you works at Geico, and future you is also a beekeeper.
Me? I don't even go outside.
Well, with Geico, you got a consistent schedule, so you are now one with nature, my friend.
So I've become a bee person?
Technically an apiarist, and yes, you also got a competitive salary, so you had the funds to start a new hobby.
All right, give me that honey.
Virginia Beach. Start your future at Geico. We're hiring claim sales and service agents. Apply online today at geico.jobs/Virginia Beach.
The Peel Art Gallery, Museum and Archives, also known as PAMA, is pleased to partner with Caribbean Art Fair, Black Artist Network and Dialogue, and guest curators Karen Carter and Craig Manuel to present When Night Stirred at Sea, Contemporary Caribbean Art. This exhibit aims to connect Caribbean artists to the broader art world and includes local and international talent, including Brampton's own Janice Reed. The exhibit begins on October 29th virtually and eventually on site once PAMA reopens to the public. For more information, please visit pama.peelregion.ca.
You are listening to New Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome to New Theory Radio on Sauga 960 AM, the show where we theorize on arts and pop culture. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host. New Theory Radio is presented by PAMA, the Peel Art Gallery, Museum and Archives. And we're kicking off today's show by welcoming a new member to the Sauga 960 family. And before I introduce this person, I do have to add that Sauga 960 AM recently won the Platinum's Reader's Choice Award for Best Radio Station by Mississauga News. So big shout outs to the team for that. But the station continues to welcome awesome programs to its lineup. And one in particular is by someone who is a legend within the Canadian music radio industry. He is synonymous with stories about music, having long worked in media and inside the record business. He's had behind-the-scenes access to hundreds of rock stars. You're not going to believe the amount of people he's been able to have conversations with. For decades, he's brought those conversations to light in printed books, audiobooks, his podcast, and most famously to the radio. His voice is very distinct and welcoming, and his presentation is a true companion to music fans and radio listeners everywhere. And his show, Records and Rockstars, which just started on Sauga 960 AM, I would say a few days back, is a spin-off off of his acclaimed first book and his former series, Legends of Classic Rock. In a nutshell, he talks about music and the people that make it, and I'm pleased to welcome him to NTR. Please welcome Jeff Woods. Jeff, thanks so much for making time for us here.
Thanks for the invitation, Nav. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. And it was funny when Praveen told me that you were joining us. I jumped to the opportunity to speak to you because we do talk about music quite frequently here on New Theory Radio. A lot of it's also based around what's happening locally in the Peel region, but we also share some theories on what's going on. But hey, you're quite the historian, so I'm looking forward to diving deep into music theories with you.
I'm all yours for as long as you like. Let's talk music. I
love it.
And I there's a couple of really key anniversaries sort of today, tomorrow that are just, I don't know. I don't think anything's by chance, but somehow it's shocking that we're talking today, and we'll get into why in a bit. But shoot.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird how it worked out, and again, I think it'll definitely make for a more engaging episode. Even though I know this will be engaging for sure. And I want to first ask you, Jeff, how did you come up with Records and Rockstars? Because I know a lot of people are familiar with your work with the Legends of Classic Rock series that you've done for a couple of years. But how did Records and Rockstars? How did that come about?
Well, Legends was a series I did for 14 years. Started in 2001. And it'll lead to why I came up with the new name in a second. The Legend series was a boss, a former co-worker, Stu Myers, when we worked together, Q107 Radio. He said, why don't you do a show, a series, kind of like what Alan Cross does with newer music, but for older music. And he goes, I can imagine the word legends in the name. And so I I came up with Legends of Classic Rock because the station was largely playing that kind of music. And so after 14 years of doing that, I parted ways with the corporation. I kind of wanted to do my own thing, and they were happy about that too. Because sometimes, relationships, you move on, things change, and usually for the better. So here I was having 14 years of shows that they owned. And I thought, I'm going to start a new show. And what is it about, really? Well, it's about records, albums, really. And it doesn't matter what the format are. They're an album. But records were kind of something I always loved spinning. The vinyl record that you put on a turntable. So there. And who makes records? Rock stars. But rock stars in a context that's broader than just people who are musicians. You're a rock star of the radio Sunday mornings. I'm a rock star of my little studio here to the kids sometimes. So Records and Rockstars was really, I like the alliteration. I like the RR. So they became that. And now I own the show, and stations like Sauga 960 who want to play it, I give it to you guys to play. So the audience who loved Legends and loves Records and Rockstars gets to hear it 3 times a week now, right? You mentioned a couple of days ago, Friday evening at 8 it started. It'll be back on the air this afternoon at 3 for 2 hours.
Amazing. We're happy to have you. And what's actually interesting about Records and Rockstars, when I was checking out the podcast version, is you don't only just go deep into the history, but you also talk to current artists as well as those that are emerging. Why was that important for you? Did you feel that was the next generation coming out of Legends?
Well, when I first got into radio back in the 1980s, I worked for a station in Halifax that played music from the 60s and 70s and 80s and a lot of current music. It was 85 I started there, and records that were coming out in 85, we played tons of them. When the new Dire Straits Brothers in Arms album came out, we played that. 2 years later, when the Joshua Tree came out, we played that. We consider those albums classic rock now, but they were brand new at one time. And I was fortunate to play those, and I loved doing that. Eventually, radio evolved to a point where classic rock became a format, and it really ignored the new music that was coming out. Now, I will concede that there's a wealth of great music from the mid-'60s to the mid-'70s that will never be matched in terms of its influence and impact on modern music. However, every year, there's a lot of great music that comes out. It's just tougher to find now, tougher to curate, because there's so much of it.
So much.
People are making records on their computer in their bedroom. And a lot of that's good, but there's so much music. People are overwhelmed. And some people are led, therefore, to believe, hey, there's no good music anymore. It's just that there's not the curation there once was, and not everyone is playing new music. So when I decided to do a podcast and call it Records and Rockstars, I thought I'm going to get new bands I really love to come in. I love the idea of an unknown band that you just feel good about and you want to expose. You want to put a spotlight on them. So that's what I do once a week on the Records and Rockstars podcast. It's separate from the radio show. And I'll just plug where it is. Wherever you get podcasts, type in Jeff Wood's Records and Rockstars, and there's 65 episodes there.
Amazing.
Right.
Yeah, I did a bit of a deep dive on it this week, and yeah, I even bands I wasn't familiar with, I was just so captivated by the way that you were interviewing them and just kind of hearing about their stories. I thought was very fantastic, and it got me thinking, Jeff. You've been in the game for quite some time. How did you fall in love with rock and roll?
I guess like a lot of us did, transistor radio, late night largely. But, my Saturdays and Sundays I was consumed at the age of 6 and 7 years old. My mom's mom gave me a little avocado green colored leather wrapped transistor radio. and in the early 70s when I was listening, AM radio was a bigger deal in Toronto. So, Chum AM played music, and 680 CFTR AM played music. And that was all we listened to until, down the road, it was album rock on Chum FM and Q107 and CFNY. But it was about the songs to me. And it was about the information around the music that I was captivated by. So 6 and 7 and 8 and 14 and 15 and 17. And then I'm 18 and I'm like, what am I going to do for a living? What I listened to as a little kid influenced what I wanted to be. So I became a radio DJ.
Amazing. And what's great about your story, Jeff, is the amount of, I guess, stories you've been told in person, because you really have spoken to the who's who in rock music. I'm talking David Bowie, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Fleetwood Mac, Rush, the Rolling Stones. The list continues. I'm going to nerd out a little bit and just ask you, out of all of these interactions, tell me about some memorable moments with any of these artists, whether it be during the interviews or even just after the interviews have taken place. Because I still remember a really good conversation that you had with Jimmy Page that was very captivating and very opening as well. And that was only just a few years ago.
Jimmy, I talked to a bunch of times, 4 or 5 times. The first time was interesting because it was in New York City in the late 90s, and he was with Robert Plant. They put out an album, largely a tribute to the blues, called Walking into Clarksdale, Mississippi. And there was a lot of new music on there that thematically dealt with the blues and their visits to the deep south of America, because they were re-educating themselves on the music that they originally stole in the 1960s. I'm not kidding, but it is funny. They later paid through the nose, as they should have, to use some of the songs that they originally didn't give credit for. However, at this point, Robert was really the dominating force in that interview. It was the three of us in a hotel, and Jimmy had almost nothing to say that time. Robert took over. The next time I saw Jimmy, it was just Jimmy and me, and the next time after that, and the next time after that, and each of those times he was very in control. But the reason being, I think, Zeppelin was his band. He hired the other guys, right? So in the instances I spoke with him thereafter, he was talking about the archives that were all the Led Zeppelin recordings. And of course, he's the one to tell you about that, because he went through them all and remastered them and found tracks that hadn't been released and so on. So he really opened up a lot of people's eyes to what they'd been missing in terms of alternate takes and so on. It was for Led Zeppelin eggheads, nerds. You have to be really into Zeppelin to have appreciated what he uncovered. It was fun. Jimmy's a Capricorn. So am I. So I can say it. He's a moody SOB. He 1 minute he's the sweetest, best friend in the world, but he can turn. He didn't really turn on me, but I just saw the duality of his personality, like a typical Capricorn. But it was still fun. Bowie was the most fun. And the reason being is, after he extended the interview from 40 to about 60 minutes, David still stuck around, even though he was late for his rehearsal. We could hear his band downstairs.
Yeah.
They'd been rehearsing for a tour he was about to do for about an hour before he even got there. He got there. He was on a phone call. He apologized to me, finally came out. We assembled in another room. Again, in a New York City warehouse. We chatted. It went from 40 to 50 to 60 to 65 minutes.
Wow.
And then we stood up and we just talked. We face to face. He just stayed for another 10 or 15 minutes. And we still talked about music, but he was like a kid, because he had a new record and it was his new toy. And he knew that I cared about it and liked it. So he wanted to talk longer about it. That was the best.
Oh, that's awesome. That's like, I always find that when you meet someone that you've admired for so long and you finally have that interaction with them, where, sitting in our seats, where you get to interview them, and then you realize, hey, they're just like us. Like, they're just everyday people that just love to have human interaction and love to just have really good conversation. Those moments always mean the most to me. Like, I've had a couple of interactions, and I haven't talked to anybody the scale of the people that you've met or that you've interviewed, but even being able to talk to some of the people I talked to locally that I've admired or I followed their career and I know a lot about, and just having those moments always mean the most.
I totally agree. I mean, it doesn't matter who you're talking to. At the end of the day, we're all putting our pants on one leg at a time, as it were. And David Bowie and Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, yeah, they're all like you and me in many regards. They've become bigger than life because we've been seeing them all these years on billboards and videos. But at the end of the day, once you get past that initial, oh my God, it's Mick Jagger, then the guy's in a room with you and you chat. Mick was sweet. He was super nice. He was genuine. He laughed at my recollections of Stones stuff in a way that surprised me. He laughed like a combination of Austin Powers and himself. Like he just just this funny British laugh, and it just lightened the room up, and I was able to talk to him like not a massive celebrity, but like you said, like a guy in a room.
That's awesome. As you were telling me about your first interaction with Page and Plant, it got me thinking, and I remember a few years ago, there was this rumor that Led Zeppelin was going to do a reunion tour. I think it might have been their 50th anniversary or something like that. And I remember it got to the point where the Rogers Center, somebody who worked at the Rogers Center claimed that there was a Led Zeppelin reunion booking, because I think at that time they were doing a couple shows in the UK. And me and my sister were stoked because, again, I wasn't around for Zeppelin's heyday, but just kind of being a fan of music, you start to educate yourself, and you start to really dive deep into their catalogs. And I remember doing that just even throughout my university time. And then we found out it was a rumor. It never came to true. It never happened. I think it was like 2013 or 2014. Why do you think that's never happened? Zeppelin have a run like after their heyday, similar to a Rolling Stones?
Because Robert didn't want to do it. And you know what? I don't blame him one bit. Why continue to do it? Well, the Stones did it because they were still creating some new music. They weren't going out solely as a nostalgia act, while they weren't playing much of the new music live because they have a catalog with hundreds of songs. They were still endeavoring to come up with some new music and record it. So they didn't consider themselves a best of band. They considered themselves a band that just kept going. Led Zeppelin, on the other hand, were effectively done when John Bonham died in 1980. And so Robert, correct to assume that they'd be going out largely as a nostalgia act because they were going to play all old Led Zeppelin records, the last of which was made in 1979.
Yeah.
So you can't blame a guy who's still a vital recording artist making lots of new music ever since Zeppelin finished, whereas Jimmy didn't. Jimmy made some new music, but he hasn't now for decades. Jimmy's really still stuck back there because when I last spoke to him in 2014, 15, I guess, he was promising new music soon, the likes of which we'd never heard before.
Wow.
Is effectively what he said. But let's face it, that's 6 years ago, or 5 or 6 years ago. So Robert, meanwhile, has put out a couple of albums since then. I don't blame them. You know, it would have been kind of cool, but let's not forget this one important thing. It would never sound as good as it did back then.
You are listening to New Theory Radio. You are listening to New Theory Radio.
And you are listening to New Theory Radio here on News Talk, Sauga 960 AM. And New Theory Radio is presented by PAMA, the Art Gallery, Museum, and Archives. Jeff, the show that you were most known for is before Records and Rockstars was Legends of Classic Rock, which we talked about earlier, where you used to dive into the history of some of the most legendary moments, artists, and themes within the genre. But on NTR, we like to theorize on all things arts and pop culture. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to talk to you about some of rock's most legendary myths or theories or urban legends, per se, that have existed for quite some time. The first one, and you did mention it, we're actually approaching, should we call it the faux anniversary? Does that make sense? It's it's the Beatles and Paul McCartney and the ever popular, ever disputed Paul is dead theory. So it's a conspiracy theory alleging that the English musician Paul McCartney, who we all know of the Beatles, died on November 9th, 1966. So tomorrow, when people are listening to this.
54 years ago tomorrow.
54 years ago tomorrow, allegedly, Paul McCartney died in a car crash. And he was secretly replaced by a lookalike. And I remember the infancy of YouTube. And I remember, like, my first YouTube black hole moment where you sort of watch these videos, and now people might consider them fake news, but you watch these conspiracy theory videos. One of them was this theory where somebody had outlined all the reasons why Paul McCartney is not the real Paul McCartney right now. And I remember just as somebody who was in his early 20s, I was like, oh, this is freaking me out. But I was hoping you can give the listeners a bit of a background and maybe provide some perspective as to why this may not be true.
Well, I think it's interesting to note why it even happened, why the rumor even started. And like a lot of rumors, we're talking 1960s. Right? It was 67 when the rumor first started, germinating. It was 1969 when it really gained steam in the U.S. And it did so because we're talking about college kids, some of whom were probably experimenting on campus and going, well, man, what if, and it became this thing. What if Paul's really not, what if they got another guy that looks like him? I think the best clues were visual. Musically, there were a bunch of clues. I think the one that people go to is from the 1968 double album, the White Album by the Beatles, where John Lennon sings, "Here's another clue for you all: the walrus was Paul" in the song "Glass Onion," and people are like, "Oh my God, does that mean he's?" They jumped to the conclusion that he was dead.
Yeah.
But it was just John fooling around with words, as the Beatles did with all their songs, correct? But visually, it was the 1969 album that the Beatles recorded last together, the Abbey Road record. And on the cover, there were some supposed clues. Paul walking barefoot was one. What happens when we're dead? We're on a slab and we don't have shoes on. And we usually have a tagger. Apparently, I don't know. So there's the four Beatles walking across the street in front of Abbey Road Studios, and he's got bare feet. And the others were, said to be George was dressed casually, said to be the grave digger. John's all in white, but Paul in particular with the bare feet. He's also smoking, but with his right hand instead of his left. They're like,
wow.
that can't be him. That's an imposter. But the license plate on the car that's parked on the street, it's a VW Bug, and the license plate is LMW28IF. So they thought of it as Paul's wife, Linda McCartney widow, or Linda McCartney weeps. And the 28IF was thought to be 28 if. He would be 28 years old if he were alive.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Right?
I had no idea about the license plate. I remember the cover I knew about, because I remember the cover's been a big part of pop culture for quite some time. You always see parodies of the Abbey Road cover, but the license plate, something I just found out. Even I think also Sgt. Pepper's, there's like a tomb or something, or like a tombstone or some type of memorial on the front that people assumed was related to Paul as well, right?
There's so many clues, both visually on a couple of records, and certainly lyrically. But it was fun. It is fun. If you add them all up, you're like, oh, yeah, maybe. But such a rich history as the Beatles, and so many visuals and so many songs, you're bound to, you find what you're looking for sometimes. And that's what people found. We all know that it's a complete hoax, but it was kind of a fun hoax.
Yeah, and Paul's still putting out albums. The last album was actually pretty good. So, kudos to him. Do you think the Beatles were in on it?
No.
Okay.
They didn't have time for this stuff, but I think they were caught off guard a lot of the time when there were rumors circulating about them. They were just trying to have a little fun and make a couple of records, and the fans worldwide were having conversations, and sometimes they turned into rumors, particularly among college kids who were experimenting with God knows what.
Well, speaking of experimenting, I think it's a great segue to my second one that I want to talk to you about, and that is Keith Richards. So there's a rumor that Keith Richards, who, again, total legend, still playing shows. Well, before the pandemic, who knows? And I'm sure once the pandemic is over, the Stones will be back, because I know they had a summer show lined up in Ontario over the summer that had to get canceled because of COVID. But it's no secret that Keith is a legend, and I know you've talked to Keith a number of different times. He's also a legend when it comes to having a good time. But there is this rumor, and it's funny, I didn't actually know this one until I'd say a few years ago. that he actually had a procedure done in Switzerland where he got brand new blood put into his system to maybe replace some of the tainted blood that he had due to some of his recreational activities. Do you want to elaborate on this one?
Well, the great thing about that urban legend is that it seemed plausible, right? The Stones, Keith Richards going to Switzerland to a clinic to have his blood changed. Well, we give blood and we have blood transfusions, and we knew that Keith was, an addict with booze and pills and powders, and so it seemed like, yeah, that's believable, and we all did believe it forever. As the story went, he was at Heathrow on his way to Switzerland for treatment for addiction. And some people stopped him, some kids, he called them youngsters at the airport, and said, hey, what are you doing? He said, I'm going to Switzerland to exchange my blood. He made a joke about it. So that became what it became, that he was having a complete blood transfusion. But as if they were removing all the oil and putting new stuff in. It seemed plausible. I mean, he was a mess, but they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't take all your blood out and put it all back in.
Yeah.
Somebody's fresh and clean blood, and now you're all better.
Well, considering
kind of fun.
It is, and Keith Richards just has such an aura right around him. He just again, when you think of rock star that's gone through it and is still alive, and it's funny. I remember someone on Twitter recently was saying, Keith Richards and Ric Flair from pro wrestling. They're like the exact same person. Like they're just somebody that's a constant that will continue to live on because of just pure legend. And it also got me thinking, I'm digressing a little bit, but it got me thinking about our prime minister's mother and how she used to party with the Rolling Stones.
Well, yeah, she did go to the El Macambo show in 77 and then followed them down to New York City, and none of them admitted to being with her, as it were, although there was rumor that perhaps Ronnie was.
Oh, wow. Really?
It's kind of cool. Maggie was fun, and Pierre was a busy man, so she needed to have fun somehow. It was either Mother's Little Helpers or following the Rolling Stones. So can't blame a girl for trying to have a little fun. The other fun one that is true about Keith, his dad Bert, who was a factory worker, who he and his wife gave birth to Keith during the Second World War, and London was bombed and just about destroyed, and so all these little kids are running around the rubble, and there's Bert going off to work. Many years later, he was 84 years old when he died, and he was cremated. And as the story goes, some of the ashes spilled. And what are you going to do? Are you going to put him in the dustbin? Hell, there's no. That's not a tribute.
I see where this is going.
So Keith admitted that he put them on the table, and maybe he crunched them up with a little bit of other powder. But he snorted them.
Wow.
Because it was a tribute. What are you going to do with your father's ashes? Put them in the dustbin or snort them? And he said, didn't hurt me. And he said, my dad wouldn't have cared. He probably would have laughed. So that's one way to pay tribute to your deceased parent.
I guess that's the type of relationship that you aim for, right? with your parents.
I would think. No hard feelings.
It's funny. And this is somewhat related. I saw recently that you can actually, there's like a company, I think in the US or somewhere, I'll have to double check where this is located, but there is a place where you can request to have your ashes put in and made into a vinyl record.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think anything that can happen will happen. Anything you can think of. Your imagination is the only limitation to what can happen. So yeah, that makes sense. Gosh.
Yeah, that's fascinating. One last one that I want to talk to you about is one of my favorite bands of all time is The Doors, and Jim Morrison, who's a legend within himself, the good old Lizard King. There's so much secrecy around his death, and some people feel like he might still be alive because apparently there wasn't an autopsy done. Just a lot of different things. And I remember as a kid, and again, I think I stumbled upon this movie by accident, probably late night watching CHCH or something. I remember seeing Val Kilmer's performance as Jim Morrison in the Doors movie, who I think Val Kilmer did a fantastic job, by the way.
It was his best role, period.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely better than Batman. But I remember that's what introduced me to the Doors music. And just, I remember as a kid, like being 10, 11, 12, just being fascinated by this guy, Jim Morrison, who just was such a free spirit. And then as I get older, you hear about these rumors that, hey, he could still be alive. And what do you think? Because I know you have some history with the Doors. Like, what do you think about this rumor?
Well, I too was and continue to be a fan of the Doors and Jim Morrison. And what I love the most, I think, of many things I love about the Doors and the music of Jim, was that he sounded like a man. He was in his 20s. He was barely in his 20s when the Doors started making records. And that voice is the voice of a man.
It is.
And that's missing from music now. Music has changed so much that a lot of male voices, and I'm not disparaging anything that isn't like the Doors. What I'm saying is you don't hear a voice like that anymore, do you? Rarely. There's still a few out there. Eddie Vedder's got a baritone, and some of my favorite singers do. But by and large, on the radio, music radio, nobody sounds like Jim Morrison. I liked that about him. It was a cross between a cabaret singer, because you know how he crooned.
Yeah.
But he also had guttural, moaning, screaming vocals that would be beyond belief at the time, and still to this day. So huge fan. There's no bloody way he lived beyond the age of 27. It would be cool to think that he showed up in South America at some point and was still living. But these people are not alive; they're gone. And what's neat about the Jim death, I guess, as much as anything, was that he continued to keep the conversation alive about the 27 Club, because we'd already lost Brian Jones a year earlier at the age of 27, the guy that named the Rolling Stones, the original guitar player alongside Keith Richards. We'd lost Jimi Hendrix. We'd lost Janis Joplin. They were all 27. And then through the years, we continued to lose people at the age of 27.
Amy Winehouse. I feel like that's another show you and I can do.
It really is. Yeah. Amy Winehouse, Kurt Cobain, and there was about 10 or 15 more that are of repute that died at that age. Mm-hmm. And you know who else died at the age of 27?
Who?
Jim Morrison's girlfriend, Pamela. Morrison.
Wow.
3 years after Jim had passed, she had turned 27, and she too died from an overdose, as I recall. Mm-hmm. So, you know what's kind of crazy is this. I was talking about how the timing of this interview with you today. Yeah. Well, it was the summer of '66. The Doors played their final show at the Whiskey in L.A., and they got booted out of there because Jim started singing that Oedipus sort of passage in the end about doing things to his mother and father that weren't considered appropriate for a nightclub. So the Doors got kicked out. They were no longer the house band. Well, 40 years later, I got invited down to see the Doors and interview them, the remaining Doors. And they did a show, and it was 14 years ago today.
Oh.
At the Whiskey.
Excellent. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, when you asked me to do this show, I wasn't, I started going back through my notes and thought, how can that be? It was today in 2006.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. What was your memories of that show?
Well, I got flown down to interview Ray Manzarek because a book had come out about the Doors, and some reissues had come out. So I was sitting there poolside at the Best Western Hotel. It was warm that day in November because it's Los Angeles, right?
Exactly.
I was thinking what I was going to ask Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player from the Doors who helped found the band with Jim after they met on the beach that day. And I went to the show that evening and get the lineup. So there's Robbie Krieger, the guitarist from the Doors, who I got to speak to as well. And there's Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player. The drummer, John Densmore, that's when they were not getting along, so he didn't participate in the show.
Okay.
there was that lawsuit over them using the name The Doors. He didn't like it. They later kissed and made up. That's another story. But on this day, you got half the Doors, and then they had two singers taking. This is how great Jim Morrison was. It takes two singers to replace him. It was Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction.
Wow.
And Chester Bennington from Linkin Park.
Oh, wow.
And they were trading off different songs. They were doing them separately. They were doing them together. And then, in addition to Robbie Krieger, the guitar player, they had Slash from Guns N' Roses and Nuno Bettencourt from the band Extreme on guitar.
Wow.
And then various other players. It was a crazy good show. All the classic Doors. Oh, and introducing them was legendary Los Angeles radio DJ from KLOS, Jim Ladd.
Wow.
Who was their friends back then in the 60s. So, I mean, that show was crazy. I had quit drinking for a year because I had contracted hepatitis A, which attacks your liver.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to feel a little bit better right around that time. So I thought, I can't be at the whiskey bar on the Sunset Strip watching The Doors and not have a beer. So I had 6.
You're okay. You're okay.
I lived through it.
You're still with us. that just that was fun. Talk about legendary, especially when, again, nothing will ever make up the original members, but to even see like the class you just mentioned of just legends
right
on stage paying homage, you can't beat it.
And it spoke to the impact those guys, the original Doors, had on so-called modern musicians. Chester Bennington from Linkin Park who's now deceased, as you probably know.
Yeah,
sadly, he was good friends with Chris Cornell, who is also now deceased. But these guys were all fans of the Doors. How could you not be? When I hear someone say, "Hey, I don't really like the Doors; they were overrated," I can't talk to you. It's like people say they're not fans of the Beatles.
Yeah, exactly.
What is that even?
No idea. Like to me, I feel like the Doors, they don't get as much respect, to your point, as other bands should. And again, the sound is so unique and I think about just Light My Fire. Like that's just such a legendary track, right? Like I think again, it's one of those bands that I feel, you have your core set of bands, especially when you think about like fashion as an example, and you pop into any mainstream retailer and they always have their Beatles t-shirt and their Nirvana t-shirt and they have their Zeppelin t-shirt. Now I'm a big hip hop fan, so they have your Wu-Tang t-shirt, right? You never see a Doors t-shirt. And I'm like, why not? Like, why can't I buy it?
maybe the Doors management were just better at copyright protection.
Yeah. They weren't going the Kiss route. They weren't going to put up their logo on everything.
You'd remind me of something when I was about 12 years old with my mom at the mall in Oshawa Center. And it was the first time I ever saw a band on a t-shirt. It wasn't a concert shirt. It was at Eaton's. It was in a department store in the men's section. And they had these racks of shirts with Eric Clapton.
Wow.
And I didn't know that there was a shirt in a department store with a rock star on it. It was a brand new thing to me. It was a brand new thing, period.
Yeah.
In a clothing store. They had them at concerts for sure. And that always stuck with me. I didn't ask my mom for it, but I was intrigued by it.
Oh yeah, I feel like artist merch is like another topic I think you and I can talk about as well, because now you have artists partnering up with like Nike and Adidas coming out with like exclusive collections, right? Like that in itself has progressed a lot since just buying a t-shirt, for $10 at your local show. But yeah, Jeff, I really appreciate having you on New Theory Radio. I feel like I'm definitely going to have to bring you on more often, because I think we could talk about a bunch of different things. Records and Rockstars is the show that we air on Sauga 960 AM. Give us a plug. Give the listeners some information as to how often they can check it out on the station, as well as the podcast version.
Okay, podcast first. The podcast is a separate entity, but it is called Records and Rockstars, and it's me sitting down with artists once a week at least, and chatting, and sometimes we go to their albums and pull a couple of songs, and we always get them to play live. So in the next 2-3 weeks, I'll be putting up about a half dozen episodes, and you can get them wherever you get podcasts, Jeff Woods Records and Rockstars, or just go to my website, jeffwoodsradio.com. The books there. I narrated a book on the Horseshoe Tavern, the history of the
Oh,
Horseshoe,
excellent.
written by an incredible music writer named David McPherson.
Mhm.
And he asked me to narrate it. So it's 5.5 hours on the history of the legendary Horseshoe Tavern.
That's awesome.
Wherever you buy audiobooks, you can get that. So the show that's on this radio station 3 times a week, it's on this afternoon from 3 till 5. The first hour is this week's show, and the second hour is a show that I did in the last 3 or 4 years.
Oh, excellent.
So it's new and then archived 3 times a week. The schedule is on the Sauga 960 website.
Excellent. Jeff, we're going to have to bring you on again. And yeah, I just want to know, I know we were given some tough news this week when it came to, the Mod Club, which is a very popular music venue in Toronto, and unfortunately they're shutting down their doors. Again, obviously the pandemic has hit a lot of music venues, straight in the gut regarding what's going on. So I urge everybody, continue to support your local music venues. Obviously we can't go to shows right now, but if anything, go check out that book you narrated on the Horseshoe Tavern, because we can't lose these legendary institutions. Like they make the city, they make Toronto so important, and I'm very happy that the Elmo is back, because I think that was one of the first venues I went to go see a show.
I like music in a small room. The Whiskey's not a huge room. The Almo's not a giant building. The Horseshoe's even smaller. There's nothing like the intimacy of a small room. And to lose the prospect of losing more of these in the city is disheartening. I hope the Horseshoe hangs in. The guys that run it are smart. Jeff Cohen and Craig Lasky. They don't own the building though. So let's just hope that. Let's just hope that we live through this and the clubs live through it with us.
Yeah, I can't wait to go to my first live show after this is done.
Me too. I'll be happy to come on anytime. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Jeff. We are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to have more New Theory Radio in just a few moments here on News Talk, Sauga 960 AM.
You are listening to New Theory Radio.
Welcome back to New Theory Radio here on Sauga 960 AM, the show where we theorize on arts and pop culture. My name is Nav Nanwa. I am your host. New Theory Radio is presented by PAMA, the Peel Art Gallery, Museum, and Archives. Leadership is obviously top of mind right now with all eyes, having been on the U.S. election this past week. But it's also a big topic for Be the Blueprint, which is a conference being held by Algoma University's School of Business and Economics, located in the heart of downtown Brampton. And it takes place virtually this Thursday, November 12th, from 12 to 2 p.m. Joining me to talk about this event in further detail, I have Craig Fowler, who is the business school's principal and Algoma's vice president of growth, innovation, and external relations, as well as Shahrukh Asif Khan, who is the academic advancement administrator for the business school. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me here on NTR.
Pleasure to be here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So let's just get right into it. And Shahrukh, I'll ask you the first question. Big conference taking place this Thursday. Obviously, leadership is top of mind for everyone right now. If you've been living under the rock, there's a big decision that's being made for our neighbors down south. But tell me a bit more about Be the Blueprint, because I know you guys do a lot of these types of initiatives quite frequently.
Yeah, it's a good call on trying to live under a rock. The results kind of, leave you a bit on edge. Yeah, the Be the Blueprint conference was something that came together in talks with the city of Brampton. Now, the Innovation District is taking charge and kind of collaborating and setting this up. So the goal was to basically instill the leadership values, how do you communicate as a leader? How do you become a leader? How is leader a lifelong process? We just wanted to, kind of incorporate that and a few soft skills for the youth and high school, basically students as well as our students. So it just came together beautifully as a collaboration piece. It started off as a conversation way back in December 2018. And in fall 2019 we started picking up the pace, and so far every semester since then we've managed to host one. leadership conference. And Be the Blueprint is essentially branded that way because in our communication, we're like, you know what, we want people to, basically develop their own blueprint for success. So that's the whole idea behind that.
Yeah, and honestly, as somebody who's from the city of Brampton, who's very much in tune with what's happening, especially in downtown Brampton, and just the vibrancy it's been able to bring, I think a lot of that can be attributed to Algoma and the fact that there is a bit of a youth vibe in downtown Brampton. Obviously, a little different now with the pandemic, but I think before the pandemic, you just sensed a lot of hunger and a lot of thirst to really push people further and be able to excel their careers. Craig, you hold a pretty prominent position with the business school as well as Algoma University. And obviously, like I mentioned earlier, the U.S. election is very much top of mind for everybody right now. But I'm curious, based on your leadership traits and the traits that you've seen in others, what's an attribute that you feel every leader should have?
Humility, given what's going on south of the border, is always important. I think during what we're realizing with COVID is there's a big factor that resiliency plays. I think empathy is a very important trait. It really depends on the situation. Not every leader is going to have the same traits. I think the important thing of true leadership is self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So knowing what traits you are strong on and can lean on as a leader, and what ones you really may be weaker on and need to offset with respect to teams around you or other leaders.
Yeah, exactly. I think resiliency is something that I think we're all seeking right now, considering the times that we're in.
Absolutely. And it is one of those things that I think a lot of people probably are looking at it a lot more with COVID, because I can speak just from my experience running the campus in Brampton. In March, I still remember we had a showcase, an open house where the mayor came to speak on March 10th. And it also was the same night that the NBA canceled its entire season. And at that moment, things got very different and very real. And at that stage, it was looking like it was going to be weeks, maybe months that we were into this. And, now we're 8-9 months, and resiliency really is coming to play, because you just have to keep moving forward. You have to keep looking at the glass half full. You have to be continuing to be strategic in what decisions you're making, realizing that, you're now operating in a new environment, and the resiliency thing, I think, really does come into play.
I feel like even Algoma and Brampton has had a bit of a resiliency story, because I feel like even before the pandemic, there was such a high ceiling that Algoma was setting for itself when it comes to its growth. And the fact that I still remember when you gave me a tour of the facility, I was amazed that this existed in downtown Brampton, because outside of just the storefront that you guys have, the actual facilities that you have for your students are quite phenomenal. I know I'm probably going to ask this question later, but I might as well, pose it now, considering, what we're talking about. How has Algoma adapted to the pandemic, and has that maybe added to some additional growth that maybe you were looking at for the campus in the near future?
So, yes, that does seem like quite a while ago when we walked you through. The adaptation for Algoma is similar to most of the post-secondary institutions in Ontario and Canada, for that matter. We've shifted essentially all of our learning into a remote or online setting for the time being. We're going to be doing that in the winter as well in Brampton. But where the opportunity has kind of presented itself is with respect to our physical space. We've taken the opportunity of not having students as active on our campus to really accelerate our construction.
Oh,
you saw a small component, the School of Business and Economics, which was about 1,600 square feet. You would have also seen the beginning of our Computer Science and Technology School. That was about 3,000 feet. To put it in perspective, we're in the middle of about a 19,000 square foot expansion.
Wow!
So we're expanding at 24 Queen, which is the kind of anchor building, if you will. We've taken over another floor. We're adding about 6 new classrooms, seminar rooms, more computer labs, but also expanding student space at 8 Queen. People know that as the building with the Starbucks in it and the Works Burger, but hopefully soon they'll know it as the place for Algoma and Brampton. But there we're doing a center for social, cultural, and economic innovation that's very exciting, but also a student-based student center for students to more relax and do their work. And then we've also recently taken over 52 Queen Street, which is at the other end, kind of on Theatre Lane and Chapel. So lots of expansion, lots of construction going on right now.
That's fantastic. And I think the cultural center that you guys are creating definitely excites me. And the one thing I'll say too is Algoma, the campus at its core is a business and economics school. But one thing I've noticed, especially since you guys have created such great brand awareness in Brampton, is you guys support a lot of the arts and culture spaces that exist within Brampton, which again, arts and culture has been a big focus for the city. Why was that so important to the institution, and how do you want to see Algoma perceived in the city of Brampton when it comes to these types of initiatives?
It's a great question, and it's one of the things that drew me to Algoma. I recently moved institutions and started in January, and as an urban planner, I'm an urban planner at heart. I have a master's in local economic development. And so for me, how you work in an urban campus is very important. And we were coming right into the middle of Brampton. You can't get more middle than where we are. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what's going on, in our backyard is the Rose Theatre. Down the road is the Peel Art Gallery, Museum, and Archives. We're right next to a library. We have a YMCA. We have the downtown BIA. We have the Brampton Board of Trade. We have what the city's, the Renaissance, the city's activating with respect to their innovation district, what Ryerson's doing. Sheridan has their Edge, the cybersecurity and Catalyst Center. It's all going on. And we had to figure out where we wanted to play. And that's why arts and culture were so important. You know, being a civic partner, there is a strong connection between arts and creativity and learning and innovation. And if you look back to the core of Algoma University and Sault Ste. Marie, we have a special mission. We have a strong linkage to our Aboriginal roots. We have strong linkages to the arts and cultural aspects in that phase. So, you know, we've done a lot to do that, but also wanted to support a lot. Over the summer, hopefully people have seen, we've been active at the Garden Square on the digital event, Canada Day, the Farmers Market, Rose at Home, Indigenous Education Gathering at Fletcher's Fields, National Indigenous Days. Soon to be, we're very excited, but I can't give too much information, working with the city of Brampton on a performing arts co-op program, an internship program.
Wow.
And just wanting to be a positive partner beyond just what we bring with respect to the academic and skills trades, but also being a good partner, being in the downtown core. For me, I think it's imperative to be that. You become the fabric.
Shahrukh, I wanted to ask you, in addition to the business and economics school and the wonderful activities that you guys put on and the impact that you're making currently to students within Brampton, and Craig kind of alluded to the fact that you have collaborated with the city and different school boards to bring together some unique projects. Did you want to highlight any of those, Shahrukh?
Yeah, there are a couple of ones that I'm really, we're really proud of, and something we really like to promote. One of them is the ambassador program. So this was actually built in collaboration after discussions with different high school principals and the school boards. And the target for this program is to essentially bring in students, orient them with the academic and social culture at Algoma University and the School of Business and Economics. So one of the biggest outcomes of this is that students actually get to sit through an actual lecture, so a live lecture. They get to understand the interaction. Now that we've moved virtually, they actually have the opportunity to learn both about, how an asynchronous class works and how a synchronous class works. There's a lot of opportunity for students to thoroughly understand the academic and social culture, and we throw in a bit of a fun workshop in there just to kind of get the youth and students engaged. It's something we're really proud of. It's all about, getting them excited for the next phase of their life, the next journey, it again ties it back in, brilliantly to, be the blueprint. This is just one of the stages, for their future success. One other really, really cool project that we have ongoing with in collaboration with the city of Brampton is the Admin 4896. So this course was specifically designed to basically assist up and coming local businesses to develop a growth and an effective marketing plan. So if you're a new business looking to find a way how to optimize your position in the market. This course is the way to go. We have a very talented student population at School of Business and Economics that come together and work on drafting out a comprehensive plan just to help your business go to the next stage.
Amazing. And I love the fact that Algoma is truly fostering the future in Brampton, because, when I was growing up in Brampton, you never really thought about continuing your education in the city past post-secondary. Like, sure, Sheridan was there as a great option, but a lot of people I know were always looking at Toronto or in my case, Hamilton, or even outside of Ontario for post-secondary. So to me, I just love the fact that we have an institution like Algoma in our backyard that's able to foster a lot of learning and development. Just to kind of close this segment out, we obviously, like I mentioned, we have Be the Blueprint taking place this Thursday. Shahrukh, do you want to give a quick rundown of what people can expect from 12 to 2 p.m.?
Lots of fun. So we have a very, very good workshop design. Generally, our workshops are all, of course, it's like, we pick on specific soft skills or specific skills that are needed, for you to become an effective leader. In this one on Thursday, we're looking at how you can network effectively. Of course, in a virtual era or in a virtual age right now, it's difficult for people to get online, open up the camera from the comfort of their homes. Like, to be honest, who wants to work from home? Who wants to network from home, right? So it's to basically kind of orient you with strategies and kind of get you excited. Every time you connect with someone, it has to be an exciting opportunity. So this one of the goals of this leadership conference is through the networking phase, which ladies and gentlemen, is going to be conducted by your host. We're very grateful to have that.
I was trying to avoid give myself a self plug, but thanks, Shahrukh. I appreciate it.
And we also have another gentleman, Cyan, coming in to talk about how leadership is a lifelong learning process. That's something that people always miss out on, right? And this is one of the things that I've learned throughout my time at Algoma University, being a former alumni. And it's just that, you always learn. The learning curve never ends. So how to become a lifelong learner, how to become a lifelong leader. And that's something that we're really excited to get talking about. And the one last thing is about personal branding. It's important to be able to brand yourself personally, right? And not just for your career success, but for your academic success as well, right? You got to be able to develop a brand. When people look at you and think of you, be like, hey man, this is the person we want to work with. This is the person we want to talk about. So the Be the Blueprint, again, coming full circle, is all about you as the individual, how people perceive you and how you can perceive yourself to basically be the best version of you. It's just one of those things.
Amazing. And if anybody wants more information or they want to sign up, because I know this is open to the public, please provide that information.
You can sign up through the City of Brampton's website, Downtown BIA's website. We are on their events calendar, or you feel free to visit our Algoma University website on our events calendar. You should be able to sign up through there. Or if you love social media, you prefer going through there, check us out on Instagram. We have a lot of cool posts. So if you end up don't even signing up for the leadership conference, at least you'll learn a bit more about us.
Amazing. Well, Craig, Shahrukh, thank you so much for coming on New Theory Radio. Greatly appreciate it. That's Be the Blueprint, taking place this Thursday, November 12th from 12 to 2 p.m. And we'll definitely provide that information on our social feeds as well as our podcast description. And this actually concludes another edition of New Theory Radio. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you want to connect with me, it is at Nav Nanwa on Instagram and Twitter. If you want to connect with New Theory Radio, it's at New Theory Radio across all platforms. Special shout outs to our photographer / graphic designer at Colorblind Photography _Amit Nanwa, as well as the producer of our theme song, Dusty Loops. Go hit him up at Dusty Loops across all platforms for always supporting the show. And that's a wrap for this week. New Theory Radio is presented by PAMA, the Peel Art Gallery, Museum, and Archives. And you will hear all of us next time. Peace.
Present you is burnt out at your current job. But future you works at Geico, and future you is also a beekeeper.
Me? I don't even go outside.
Well, with Geico, you got a consistent schedule, so you are now one with nature, my friend.
So I've become a bee person?
Technically an apiarist, and yes, you also got a competitive salary, so you had the funds to start a new hobby.
All right, give me that honey.
Virginia Beach. Start your future at Geico. We're hiring claim sales and service agents. Apply online today at geico.job/Virginia Beach.
Present you is burnt out at your current job. But future you works at Geico, and future you is also a beekeeper.
Me? I don't even go outside.
Well, with Geico, you got a consistent schedule, so you are now one with nature, my friend.
So I've become a bee person?
Technically an apiarist, and yes, you also got a competitive salary, so you had the funds to start a new hobby.
All right, give me that honey.
Virginia Beach. Start your future at Geico. We're hiring claim sales and service agents. Apply online today at geico.job/Virginia Beach.